Assalamu alaikum, dear students. In this video lecture, we will discuss the arithmetic line graphs. Students, such graphs are also known as time series graphs. And here in this lecture, you will learn how to construct the arithmetic line graphs, or we can say time series graphs. So firstly, what is an arithmetic line graph? Students, representation of statistical data on a graph paper where lines are drawn joining points which represent arithmetic values of variables is called an arithmetic line graph. Thus, we can say that a graph showing arithmetic values of a variable on a graph paper is called arithmetic line graph. Such type of graphs show the relationship between two or more than two variables. Students, arithmetic line graphs are also called time series graphs, as such graphs are often constructed to present time series data. What is a time series? Dear students, when we observe the values of a variable at different points of time, the series so formed is known as time series. So, time series graphs or arithmetic graphs show the changes in the values of a variable with the passage of time, and they are very useful for identifying patterns and trends in time series data. Now, let's explain how to construct a graph. Students, in the construction of graphs, two simple lines, one horizontal line and one vertical line, which are called axes, are first drawn. The two lines intersect each other at right angle. The point where the two lines intersect each other is known as the point of origin, or we can say the 0 point. The horizontal line from left to right is called horizontal axis, x-axis or abscissa. The vertical line is called vertical axis, y-axis or ordinate. Students, the x-axis and y-axis, which are mutually perpendicular to each other, divide the plane of the graph paper in 4 parts, and each part is called a quadrant. Thus, there are 4 quadrants in the whole plotting area. Here in this slide is the graphical plan. We can see here that the line XX, which is the horizontal line, XX dash, is the abscissa, or we can say x-axis, and the vertical line YY dash is y-axis, or we can say ordinate. These two lines, that is x dash and y dash, cut each other at point O, or we can say at point 0, which is the point of origin. In x-axis, on the right side of the point of origin, positive values are shown, while on the left hand side of the point of origin, negative values are shown. In y-axis, positive values are shown above the point of origin and negative values below it. Students, abscissa, that's x-axis, and ordinate, that is y-axis, thus divide the whole graph paper into 4 quadrants. As we can see here in the graphical plan, in quadrant first, both the values of x and y are positive. In quadrant second, y is positive but the values of x are negative. In quadrant third, both the values of x as well as y are negative. And in quadrant fourth, x is positive whereas y is negative. Since most of the business data are positive, so quadrant first is most frequently used, where we can show the positive values of both x and y. Now coming to the rules for constructing an arithmetic line graph, or we can say time series graph. Students, the important pointers which must be keep in mind while constructing a time series graph are: first, it should be keep in mind that every graph should be given a suitable and precise heading, or we can say title, which must be self-explanatory about the nature of information in the graph. Moreover, the unit of time in which the variable under consideration is measured should be clearly stated in the title of the graph. Students, it is conventional to take the independent variable on the horizontal axis, that is on the x-axis, and dependent variable on the vertical axis, or we can say y-axis. Thus, in case of time series graphs, time is represented on the horizontal axis and the values of dependent variables are represented on the vertical axis. Dear students, for each axis, a convenient scale is chosen which represents the unit of a variable. The choice is made in such a manner that the entire data is accommodated in the space available. After the choice of the scale, plot the value of the variables corresponding to the time factor. The various pointers so obtained are then joined by straight lines which must be uniform throughout its length. The graph so obtained is the time series graph. Students, it should be noted that if on one graph paper more than one variable is shown, that is, if more than one curve or line are to be drawn in the same graph paper, they should be distinguished by the use of thick lines, thin or dotted lines, etc. Or different colors can also be used. Dear students, if the values of the variables shown on the y-axis are very large and difference between the smallest value and 0 is high, then a false baseline is used. In false baseline, the scale from 0, that is the point of origin, to the smallest value of the variable is omitted. This line is used to break the continuity of y-axis with the origin, because if we maintain the continuity of the value from the origin, then sufficient portion of the graph would go waste. In case of false baseline, generally vertical line is broken into two parts and some blank space is left between them. Thus, the false baseline is represented either by showing a cut or kink on the y-axis. Dear students, arithmetic line graphs or time series graphs can mainly be of two types. First, one variable graphs, and second, two or more than two variable graphs. Let us first explain one variable graphs. Dear students, one variable graphs are those graphs in which values of only one variable are shown with respect to some time period. Or we can say, when only one variable is to be presented with respect to some time period on a graph paper, then one variable graphs are used. This can be better explained with the help of an illustration. The table in this slide shows the production of wheat in million tons from year 2012 to 2018. The first column of this table shows the independent variable, which is time period, and the second column of this table shows the dependent variable, which is production of wheat. We need to represent this data in the form of one variable time series graph. Just follow the rules explained in our previous slides. Indicate the independent variable, which is time period in terms of years like 2012, 2013 and so on the x-axis, and take the production of wheat, that is the dependent variable, on the y-axis. Now mark different pointers on the graph indicating values of production corresponding to different years. Finally, join the pointers to get a one variable time series graph as shown in this figure. This line graph here shows the behavior of production of wheat over different years. Now here I will show you how and where to use a false baseline. Students, the use of false baseline is very common, especially with respect to time series data. The illustration given here explains how exactly it is done. This table here shows the data regarding the total fee charged for admission purpose between the period 2010 to 2017. And we need to plot the data on graph paper. Students, presentation of this data involves the construction of a false baseline because the difference between the minimum fee charged and zero, that is the point of origin, is very high. Or we can say that the arithmetic figures regarding the fee charged start with a high value like rupees 10,000. This data is presented in a graph as shown in this slide with a false baseline. Like we can see here, the kink on the y-axis, which breaks the continuity of y-axis with the origin. So whenever a data set starts with a very high value, always use the false baseline by showing a cut or kink on the y-axis. If such values are to be indicated on the x-axis, then a cut or kink is marked on the x-axis. Now, two or more than two variable graphs. Students, these are the graphs in which values of two or more than two variables are simultaneously shown with respect to some time period. That is, in such type of graphs, we can represent two or more than two variables on the same graph paper. which eventually facilitates comparison. However, for the sake of clarity, we should not represent more than 5 or 6 variables on the same graph paper. Rather, we get confused among different lines which will cut each other. So, we should represent 5 or 5, 6 or less than 6 variables on a single graph paper, not more than 5 or 6 variables. The illustration given here in this slide will help you to understand it in a better way. The table here gives data on the production and sales of a factory in thousand rupees between January and July. So here we have the values of two variables, rather two dependent variables. One is production of a factory and second one is the sales of a factory. With respect to the dependent variable, which is a time period given in months like January, February up to July, so we can represent this data in the form of two variable graphs as shown in this figure. Here we presented the data in the form of graph in the same manner as we have done in the case of one variable graph. Along x-axis, we took time period in terms of months, and along y-axis, the data regarding two dependent variables, which are production and sales, are shown. After marking different points on the graph, indicate values of production and sales corresponding to different months. Then we join the points and we get two different graph lines in the same graph paper. Here we see the line shaded with blue color shows the behavior of production between January and July, and the line shaded with maroon color shows the behavior of sales of the same factory during the same months. So here we see that it is a two variable time series graph or two variable arithmetic graph, as it shows the values of two variables simultaneously on the same graph with respect to some time period. Thank you.